account being taken down, suspended, wasn't actually related to this topic at all. It was actually to do with the Thatcher business and the Facebook page that I'd set up. The whole story about it being taken down because of legal implications, and of course I'm being very cautious what I say here, that was actually started by somebody else, and I simply didn't know, and as I pointed out at the time, I simply didn't know because Twitter hadn't told me. So it was kind of a safe assumption that because of what was happening with National Collective and because of what was happening with Wings Over Scotland, that that was a possible explanation. But as it turns out, it was something else entirely.
What did you make of the story with National Collective and Wings Over Scotland?
Well, I said in that classic legalistic fashion, about a day or two before all the lawyers' letters went flying, that it is important for bloggers to be conscious about what the law of defamation is. I'm not saying that we should defend what the scope of the law of defamation in the UK as it stands, or rather in England and in Scotland as it stands, but actually the definition of defamation is anything which might lower the view of the reputation of the individual for the ordinary punter on the street, which isn't exactly a very exacting standard. I mean, it's quite easy to lower someone's opinion of you, and as a consequence, it means that there's quite a strong capacity for people to engage in potentially defamatory writing when they're thinking they're just making a fair comment about things, because of the scope and the chilling effect of libel in England and in Scotland under the law of defamation. So I think it's maybe a wee lesson about the risks when you critique people who are in a very good position to sue. Now, you could defame me as much as you like. I don't have the resources. I don't have the resources to sue you, or you could criticize me, and I don't have the will to instruct solicitors to pursue you through legal proceedings or just harass you in legal letters. But I think when we're talking about rich men with reputations, then it's the law of libel is much more available to them than it is to the average person, if I can put it that way.
But this is an interesting point about libel law. Is one of the reasons that it doesn't get changed because people have been complaining about it for 20 years. Does it not get changed because the legislators in the Parliament are very, very often, if you look at the demographics of it, they're those rich people that have the ability to use the system and to exploit that system for their own benefit? Is that why it doesn't get changed?
Well, I don't think that's fair, really, and it is being changed in England and Wales. There's the libel reform bills just going through Westminster at the moment, and it will extend most of its provisions only, as I say, to England and Wales. So there's no reform proposed or envisaged in Scotland, and actually I think that might be a mistake for the SNP not to consider having another look at it. That the impact of the reforms in England will be to give certain types of protection to academic publications, so you can't have cases like the Simon Singh case where chiropractors took him out for libel proceedings because he criticised some of their activities. So that's one aspect, but they're also proposing to generally increase the hurdles of defamation as such, so it won't just be reducing the kind of ordinary the right thinking person's idea of your reputation. Instead, that in order to sue you have to kind of show more serious harm. So it will mean that if this goes through in the Westminster Parliament, the Scotland will have a much more theoretically restrictive definition of defamation than might obtain if it goes through unreformed in England and Wales. And thus far, the SNP in Holyrood, has shown no real interest in revising the law of defamation.
So we might have libel tourists in Scotland instead of down in London. But Peter, what did you make in general of the National Collective story?
I'm quite happy to leave the legal aspects of the affair to Andrew. That's his area of expertise. Frankly, more interested in the political side of it. And from what I can see, Better Together have really dug themselves into a hole with this one. They've got themselves into a no-win situation by getting involved with this man. Who we won't name. They're now saying...
Alistair Darling, you mean?
Yes. I believe Alistair Darling has now ruled out returning the donation. And that's maybe understandable, but it's a no-win situation for them because whether they keep the money or return it, it's now tainted. And it just strikes me that this has been a massive incompetence in the Better Together campaign, that they haven't foreseen this, that they didn't do any background checks. I mean, they hardly even had to do any background checks, and they honestly didn't seem to foresee that this would be an issue. Now, I find that quite incomprehensible, and the man who, for my money, should be worried about his job right now is Blair McDougall. Because there's just one faux pas after another, and this one in particular is not going to go away.
Andrew?
I think Peter's right to say that the law. I mean, what I was just saying about that there is a peripheral consideration in terms of this. Obviously, it'll be important for the people who've received legal letters to think about their position, and it'll be important for us collectively to think if our defamation law is kind of striking the right balance between free expression and the protection of reputation. Because I think it is important to protect people's reputation legally, and people shouldn't just have free reign to say whatever they like and without any sort of hindrance, whether it's true or not. I don't think that's a good thing. But I think politically, donations in this area are always going to be difficult for the Better Together campaign, particularly because there is this critique of donations emanating from folk that aren't actually part of the process, that aren't theoretically emancipated via the referendum. And so the kind of image of big businessmen, of large conglomerates putting cash into the Better Together campaign is always going to be tricky for the Labour Party in particular, I think, because, the high Tory unionism is not something they want to defend, I think, in general terms, and yet they find themselves cheek by jowl with just the kind of cash contributors which they would ordinarily critique if they were adding £500,000 to, say, the Tory finances. So I think they're in this kind of cognitively dissonant position, which is only likely to intensify as we get closer to the referendum, and as the Tory and Labour Party find being cheek by jowl together in campaigns increasingly difficult in terms of the developing Westminster conflict between the two parties, which will cast, I think, a really long shadow over whatever cooperation they manage in the independence campaign.
To come back to something that Peter said, is it that they didn't check, or is it that they didn't care?
Well, I don't know. I mean, it's impossible for me to say about that. I mean, I imagine it sort of slightly touches on a point which is often made against the SNP, actually, about the donations of Brian Souter to the Scottish National Party. And Brian Souter is a man whose convictions I really do not find acceptable in the area of gay rights and such like. But it's quite a difficult thing for a political party that actually wants to win, or a political campaign that wants to win and needs to fund winning in terms of their perspective, to turn down £500,000. So I don't know if the researcher's background or not, but I imagine it would have to be quite a serious and clear, disreputable character for most political worldly characters to turn down £500,000.
In the general sense, Peter, what do you think about dirty money coming into political campaigns?
Well, I've been using the expression dodgy donations, which I thought was keeping everything on fairly safe ground. I've had no lawyer's letters so far, so it seems to be okay. There will always be questions, and the point is to the extent to which you can deal with those questions, whether as a political party or as a political campaign. The SNP dealt with Brian Souter donation reasonably well. The Better Together campaign are not dealing with this dodgy donation in question very well at all. And you asked the question whether was it the case that they didn't know or they didn't care. And I honestly think it was a case that they didn't care, because I really can't imagine how they could not know. And this is all stuff that's in the public domain. Everything that was set out in the National Collective article is material that is already in the public domain. So it's really not believable that they did not know. And I honestly think they just didn't care. And the reason that they didn't care is because they think they can rely on the mainstream media to carry them through events such as this. And it's been a serious misjudgment because the mainstream media have actually picked up on it, ironically, largely because of the legal action.
I think that's right, but the response to it from Better Together has been interesting. They've been coming out with some articles about smears and dirty tricks. One of the dirty tricks I thought was an interesting one. They said that someone ordered some campaign leaflets and put them in the bin. That sounds less like a dirty trick and more like a student prank at most. Or either that or the worst agent provocateur in history. So I don't know, Andrew, what do you think about the Better Together response to all of this?
I think it's pretty bonkers, personally. You're referring to a blog post they put up called Fears and Smears, which was just the most extraordinary cavalcade of paranoia about, and this kind of image about all Scottish nationalists being secretly black shirts and wanting to, sort of persecute the majority of decent folk that believe in the Union. Now, there are lots of decent folk that believe in the Union, but I think this image of victimization and persecution is one that we've discussed before. We got it when the McLevison proposals from McCluskey came out. It was depicted by the Labour Party as an attempt by an authoritarian Scottish National Party to take over the press, and it's just totally baseless. It's totally surreal, and I think it's a very bad sign. I mean, I don't like the sort of heightened paranoia and mutual hatred. I think it misses everyone. I think it's not the kind of debate I want to have about this question. And just this image of persecution and victim complex and victim fantasies in the campaign, I could really do without on both sides. And I think the idea that Better Together is being systematically victimized by an organized campaign of malicious cybernats coordinated from, nefarious central office is just laughably absurd, and no one with any ounce of sense would remotely believe that it was true.
Peter?
The smear, what was it? The smear and scare story that Better Together put out was totally ridiculous. Andrew's pretty well covered that. It was a total nonsense. I challenged them actually on the website to state who it was that was coordinating this alleged campaign. They haven't got back to me yet. But it's interesting for another reason. It goes back to what I was saying about how Better Together in relation to dodgy donations, that they simply didn't care. Rather than didn't know about the background, that they didn't care. And the reason that they didn't care was because they have the backing of the mainstream media. Now, on the smear and fear, that was what it was called. Catchy title, kind of downhill after that. The interesting thing about that, which illustrates my point about the mainstream media, in the Herald today, Robbie Dinwoodie has a piece in which he totally turns the story on its head. And according to his piece, it's the Yes campaign that is accusing Better Together of a smear campaign. It's totally turned the thing around, and this is what is happening, and this is what the anti-independence campaign has come to rely on, and it's perhaps led to them being, shall we say, a bit smug, in that they think they can get away with anything.
I mean, I have to be honest. I agree with Andrew in this debate. I'm fed up with the victim complexes, but I think I have to, just as an honest observer of the media, I think that most of the distortions, not all of them certainly, but a lot of the worst distortions and smear tactics and scaremongering is certainly coming from one side rather than the other at the moment.
But you're not happy to say which side.
I think that'd be clear.
This is actually another point. There are people bending over backwards to be fair, And in actual fact, what they're doing is they're kind of bending reality a wee bit as well in their efforts to be fair. I have no problem at all in being blunt about this. That is the Better Together campaign and the mainstream media, large parts of the mainstream media, there are exceptions of course, they are presenting a very distorted picture to the Scottish public, and they are doing a disservice to the people of Scotland and to democracy itself.
Andrew?
Yeah, I mean, we've discussed that before. I suppose what